In tonight's Dorchester segment, we turn our attention to a large field of candidates for a seat on the city council, new opportunities in home ownership, and the local fallout from the escalating turmoil in Haiti. To fill us in is the executive editor and publisher of the Dorchester Reporter, Bill Forry. Thank you very much for being with us, Bill.
Thanks, Chris. Good to be with you.
Well, I'd like to start with maybe the most sensational story that's on your radar screen right now, and that's the assassination of Haitian President Jovenel Moise just yesterday early in the morning, and how that's affecting people here in the community. What have you been picking up?
Yeah, Chris, this is a big deal. Obviously, it's an international atrocity. But here in Boston, it hits home for so many people who are either Haitian American themselves or allies with the Haitian community. We have more than 86,000 Haitians who live in Massachusetts by a conservative estimate, I would say. 25,000 Haitians here in the city of Boston, according to the last census, and it's probably a bigger number now. Obviously, this is roiled. They had gone to bed the night before in a celebratory mood. The Haiti national team advanced in the Gold Cup soccer tournament. It was a big deal. They play the USA this Sunday, by the way, and then to wake up on Wednesday morning to find that the president of Haiti had been assassinated in his home. The first lady of Haiti herself seriously wounded. Quite a shock. Even though for Haitians who are plugged in to Haiti, which is most people who are of Haitian descent, they're well aware that the country has really been spiraling into a much more serious phase of crises over the last year, and particularly in recent weeks, with mass shootings on the streets of Port-au-Prince, mass casualty events with journalists being targeted as well as civilians, a lot of political kidnappings and assassinations, but nothing to the level of the head of state being murdered in his home. And of course, that's something that is an ongoing investigation and roundup of suspects. We went out to Mattapan Square yesterday morning, one of our reporters, and we talked to a lot of Haitian leaders here in the city yesterday. Pretty much universal outrage and disgust with the incident. President Moise was a controversial figure, a divisive one, not unlike our politicians here in the United States, Chris. The Haitian community is not monolithic in its political beliefs here in Boston. A lot of people did not like his politics. However, to have him murdered in his home was just beyond the pale. And people are quite concerned about what comes next. This Haitian community here in Boston is the third largest in the U.S. Many people came here after the earthquake to seek asylum and have been living here with temporary protected status since 2010 or 2011. And there's the likelihood here that we could see another wave of political asylum seekers as violence is expected, unfortunately, to follow this event. And there really is a leadership void in Haiti at the moment. So it's quite a pronounced crisis, and something to keep an eye on for all of us who care about Haiti and who care about our neighbors.
No, there seems to be a long-term pattern here, because after the ironclad dictatorship of the Duvalier dynasty in the 1980s, we had this succession of promising figures and disappointment over and over again. I mean, is there any way out of this?
Well, this is so disappointing because there was a relative period of stability and effectively, peaceful transfer of power from in the aftermath of the earthquake, even when the country was in such disarray. The democratic processes continued, and President Préval, who was the president during the earthquake period, passed along the baton to Michel Martelly, who was the president until 2015, and then Jovenel Moise was elected in 2016, but that came under a cloud then of accusations that there was fraud involved in that election. So it's a fragile democracy, and we've seen that in writ large this week. There's really a crisis now, constitutional crisis going on in the country. And of course, those of us here in the US who might raise an eyebrow or look askance at that had better look at our own house as well. We have some pretty serious concerns about our own democracy at the moment, don't we? But Haiti's a whole other level right now. And is there hope? It looks kind of bleak right now, I have to say that.
I'm going to turn from the turmoil here to change in City Council District 4, which is mostly parts of Dorchester in Mattapan. You get a lot of candidates running and you have a lot of information about them in the reporter. So cue us in on that.
Yeah, Chris, this is one of those kind of under the radar political races in the city at the moment that really probably deserves more coverage, which is why we took that time over the last couple of weeks to assemble a package of mini profiles on the candidates who have made the ballot. Now we know what the ballot is because there was a period of time where we were waiting for the city to qualify people for the ballot. So we now have 9 people who are definitely on the ballot for September 14th. They are Joel Richards, Deco Jibril, Gisette Williams, Troy Smith, Leonard Lee, Brian Worrell, Will Dickerson, Jacob Urania, and Evandro Carvalho, who will be a familiar name to many voters in the city. He was the state representative. Representative Carvalho was in the 5th Suffolk District for a couple of terms, and left to run for district attorney, did not win that seat, and has since been working in City Hall. He was hired at City Hall by former Mayor Walsh. An interesting field. These folks are running to succeed Andrea Campbell, who of course has been the District 4 councilor, is leaving that seat behind to attempt to become the next mayor. And many people were interested in the seat. There were actually 13 or 14 people who said they were going to run. 9 actually qualified for the ballot. A couple of names that will also be familiar to folks, probably Deco Jibril. She ran in District 7 in 2019, was unsuccessful. She lost to Kim Janey, who's now the acting mayor. Leonard Lee has been very active in the periphery of politics in Boston for quite some time. He's in his 60s and is an activist in the Fields Corner neighborhood around Melville Park. That's where he lives. So an interesting field here, and you can read much more about each of them in this week's reporter. One of our reporters, Rebecca Pereira, spent some time with each candidate and pulled together this package this week that kind of frames out the race. We'll be doing much more coverage of this district, along with District 3, which is a competitive election for incumbent Frank Baker this year, and of course the at-large race, which will have a much more in-depth look at that field of candidates in next week's report.
The only thing I'm going to endorse here is the way you package this in the paper, because there are 2 things that are very striking. One is about the number of candidates. I don't think I've ever seen so many people running for this seat. Plus, the level of qualifications, generally speaking, there's a lot of good people running here.
That's true. I have to say this is a strong field, and it's going to be an interesting race. I know that folks who may not live in the district may not be as tuned into this. And honestly, a lot of people aren't tuned into it who are in the district at this point. The summer months are a bit of a doldrum here for political activity, but this is an important race. It's an important seat, and we'll be watching it closely. District 7, which acting Mayor Janey is leaving behind, is also a competitive election. We'll be looking at that race soon. So lots of candidates and lots to talk about and to figure out where they land in terms of their positions, Chris.
So I want to turn to one other topic that you're following here. And I know there's a huge development that's planned for the Columbia Point Peninsula. And in fact, it's so big, it's called a city. But there's also a trickle down from that as far as home ownership opportunities. So what would that mean?
Right. So Dorchester Bay City, it will be eventually a 34-acre waterfront community where Bayside Expo Center used to be, very close to UMass Boston on the Columbia Point Peninsula. Accordia Partners, which is the development team that now has a lease agreement with UMass Boston, is going to build this out over the next decade. It's massive. It's going to include thousands of new units of housing, but much more in the way of commercial space, office space, and potentially a university space for UMass Boston. So it's a huge multi-use development, and it's likely to be the biggest that we'll see in this part of the city over the next decade. So they have decided to join forces with the Mass Affordable Housing Alliance, which is one of the more prominent housing advocacy groups in the state. It's based in Dorchester. MAHA is on Dorchester Avenue, and they have a long track record, really a 30-year track record of helping new homeowners get the capital they need and get the resources they need and the loans to buy their first home. So they've dedicated, Accordia Partners has dedicated $10 million to a new fund that MAHA has started to help homeowners with their closing costs. So this will be a fund that they'll help grant qualified homeowners, sums of money to help them with their down payments to buy a home. That's a huge hurdle for so many people, as we both know, and it's an obstacle for folks who are trying to get their first home. So this has been really acclaimed by MAHA, of course, which is going to administer the program. They hope to grow that fund, by the way, to $100 million. So this is really kind of a seed fund from Accordia. And, I don't know that much of this funding will necessarily go into the Dorchester Bay City properties that will be built, but in the near term, it will help homeowners across the state really be able to realize their dream of home ownership. So it's winning strong praise from all kinds of quarters, Chris.
Bill, before we break off, there's one other thing I should bring up here, because since Gin Dumcius rejoined the Reporter now as an editor and a reporter, you have a lot more information out about what's going on with the race for mayor and even some of the things for city council. So if people want to keep up with that, either as far as articles or posts, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, we're really, really thrilled to have Gin back on our team. He was with the Reporter a number of years ago and has just recently come back to us. So we're thrilled. You can read his coverage and our coverage at .news.com, which is our website. And you can follow us on Twitter too. Best thing to do is go to .news, which is our Twitter handle. We also have the Lit Drop, which is our really focused political site, and all kinds of content going up every day. We're a weekly newspaper in print, but we're populating stories every day online. So do check us out, .news.com.